So this next tutorial is going to cover using Revit's mass modeling tools, not in the family editor, but within your project, to do some things like custom millwork, or in this case, a base for a dinosaur exhibit that I'm currently working on. So I want to go over just using those tools to build something like this, and then also using a few techniques to turn something like this into a physical model as well. So in this particular case, since this is actually working with a Triceratops, one of the first things that I want to do for context is load in a model of the object that I'm designing around. Not that this is going to be the final pose of the skeleton, and of course it's not a fleshed out Triceratops that I'm working with either, it's actually a skeleton of a Triceratops, but at least this gives me an idea of the size, the scale, and what this thing's going to look like. So I want to be able to import something like this model into Revit. So first thing we've got to do is actually find a model. So after a little bit of digging, not a lot, I was able to find a great little website, the free 3dmodels.com, that had a nice model of a Triceratops that I downloaded. And so I've got to get this into a format that I can pull into Revit, and Revit is particularly fond of DWGs as an import method. So essentially just using 3ds Max here as a go-between. So the first thing that I did inside was, I think this one actually was a 3ds file. A lot of times free models that you're going to find on the internet are STLs or OBJs. OBJs are really popular object files. So I just want to get this into the DWG file format to bring it into Revit. So I'm going to go to the Big M, Export, and I'm going to save this just for right now temporarily to my desktop as a DWG file. So I'm going to call this try1 and save and OK. So then switching over to Revit, in order to import this object in, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the big R, New. One of the best ways to import things into Revit and have really good control over them is to build a family specifically for the object. So I'm going to go New, Family. And since there isn't a pre-built family for dinosaurs, at least not that I know of, I'm just going to use a generic model, and this is one I use really often for a lot of things. I'm just going to go generic model and open. And this gives me an opportunity to build a really simple family of an object that I can drop into my Revit projects. So in this case, again, I'm just going to go to Insert, Import CAD, my desktop, and that's where my Triceratops model is. Open. It's going to take a minute to process this because essentially it's transforming the geometry from the DWG format into something that's going to work well with Revit. While it's doing that, let's take a look at one thing really quick inside of 3ds Max, because one of the things that you sometimes notice is an object inside of Max, or something that you're downloading off the internet, might be really, really high resolution. So I'm going to change my view here in Max from shaded to, let's do edged faces, so we can see the amount of geometry. And this is fairly low polygon, so it's not too big of a worry, but a lot of times you're going to run into something that is a really highly detailed mesh. In other words, the entire object is going to be at the level of detail that, let's say, this eye is on the Triceratops right here. And if that's the case, this is a secondary object for your architectural model. You really don't want that much geometry bogging your scene down. So 3ds Max is a great tool set called Optimizer, which is going to strip geometry down and simplify it for you. So with the object selected, I can go to my blue piece of macaroni called Modify, my modifier list. I'm going to scroll down to the O's and select Optimize. And what this allows me to do, there's a scroller right here. Just dropping the level of detail down to about 10% for a lot of really heavy models is going to make a dramatic difference. Again, my object right here is pretty low resolution, so I'm really not terribly worried about it. What I had would be just fine. But again, if you have a really, really highly detailed model, you might want to strip down, a dramatic amount. But you can see this is removing geometry to the point where the object will be able to run much, much faster. Let's go ahead and drop back over to Revit. So I've got my Triceratops imported in. And the next thing I need to do is put it roughly at a center point, and I need to get it to the appropriate scale, to Triceratops scale. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go create model lines, and I'm going to build a couple of quick templates. So right here around the nose, or I shouldn't say a template, but a guide. So I'm going to draw a line out 7 inches. The amount really doesn't matter a whole lot there. I'm going to draw another one. So these are just going to be guidelines for me to set up my scale. Another model line at the tail. And I'm going to drag it out about the exact same distance. So I know those are 7-inch lines, so I know this is not a Triceratops at Triceratops scale. This is at a child's toy scale. And I need it to actually be about 30 feet. What I'm modeling this for is absolutely enormous Triceratops dinosaur that's been discovered and is in the process of being prepped for display. So what I need to do, I know this distance is almost 30 feet. So I'm just going to use that as a guide. I'm going to do offset 30 feet. I'm going to offset this first line at the nose up 30 feet. So you can see it's going to be way up here. So I'm going to select my Triceratops, click. I'm going to select the scale tool, and I'm going to say these first 2 lines, this distance right here of 8 inches, 8 and 15/16, almost 9 inches, I actually want that to be 30 feet. So that was click once, twice, and the third click. So essentially what that process is saying, this 9 inches I actually want to be 30 feet. And then I can delete these guides, and I'm going to move my Triceratops back to the center location. With that, I'm going to go big R, save as, so I'm saving my family as try1. Not DWG. I don't want to save that as a DWG file. I just want to go ahead and accept the default RFA and say save. And now this guy is ready to load into my project. So you can see I now have my Triceratops that I can position anywhere in my scene. And now what's nice about this as well is that any time that I want to, I can actually go back to that family, look at the materials, make any adjustments that I need to with it, and kind of go from there. But this gets me a really good base to start with, so I have some context and some scale. So the next thing that I want to do is go ahead and draw the basic shape for the base. So I'm going to go to my level 1 floor plan, and that's a Triceratops in section, building the plan, 4 feet looking down. And I want sort of, not just a simple square base, but I actually want to build something just a little bit more complicated. So I'm going to use my model lines since they're available in every view. They're actually part of the geometry. In fact, let's go to a level, let's go to do the site plan. So that way I can see everything when I do this. So this is going to put the lines on the level 1 plan, but I can see the entirety of the Triceratops. Make sure I'm sort of getting everything all the way around it. So architecture, model lines, and I'm going to go ahead and begin drawing sort of the outline shape that I want my base to be. Sort of an inset piece here where I can put some imageries, pieces on the display, something like that. I need to trim up this last little line right here. So I'm really just doing that. That's going to be my set of guides. Something that I have to work with, something that if I want to, I can be a little bit more precise, coming back in, selecting some dimensions, maybe working those angles and getting something very, very precise. Being a little bit of a slop artist right now in terms of how I put this together. But that's okay. Let's go next to component, model in place, and as of late I've been really addicted to using these mass modeling tools. It's really free form. It has more of a feel of play and sculpting, something more akin to what you feel like when you're modeling in Max or SketchUp or something like that. And once you get used to these tools, really, really powerful. And as you notice, the ribbon is different than if you're doing a custom component generic. So this is custom component mass. It's a brand new set of tools, and it's more similar to when you're doing a massing family. So with this now, I can come in and start tracing out that initial set of guides. And I could even lock those together if I wanted to. Don't particularly want to in this particular case. Let's go ahead and I'm selecting that. You know, if I highlight over this, it's going to select everything. If I use my tab key, I can select an individual line or all of them, but I want all of them, and I'm going to go ahead and create my first form out of this, and I'm going to swing to my elevation view, and let's make that initial height only about 6 inches because I want that to sort of be the initial starting point of my base. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new piece off of this, and I'm going to use my trace line tool again. This time I'm going to offset 6 inches to create something that's kind of hovering over that base. And I'm going to go ahead and use set. I want to set my work plane to be this top surface. I'm going to build directly off the top of that. Remember, your surface or your reference plane, what I'm setting right here, is going to be the plane that I'm drawing in. So if I select that, you can see it's highlighted now. Trace lines, I want an offset of 6 inches. With my trace lines, I'm on that top plane. I'm going to go right around the outside really quickly. I believe I got the wrong line on that one. I have to go back and erase that line here in just a second. Making sure that I'm sort of in the right view is really helpful on something like this. Make sure I'm drawing that line in the correct plane. Go back and take a look at where I went terribly wrong on one of those lines in just a second. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and use the trim command to connect these last two lines, this to that. And you can see I've got this nice rogue line right here. Don't want that guy at all, and it seemed like I had one other one. Nope, that's the only one. So you can see I've drawn that all the way around the perimeter now, and I'm ready to sweep this piece up. So again, I'm going to select it, make sure everything's selected. I want to be careful, I want to watch for things like that right there, because you know, I don't know exactly what it's going to do when I do create form with something like that, but it's probably not going to be good. If I'm using the generic model system, it won't even make that form. It says, you know, you have to be a closed loop. The massing tools are a little bit more forgiving, which is both good and bad. So I'm going to go ahead and go create form. Again, I'm going to swing to my elevation view, and I'm going to set the height of this. I'm up 6 inches. I want this base to be about 24 inches total, so I'm going to do 1 foot 6. And now you can see I've got a base that's coming together with sort of a reveal along the edge of it, the bottom edge of it. And I think I'm about ready to go ahead and assign some materials to these things. So I'm just going to highlight all of it. So your material selection is really simple and straightforward. I'm not going to put a specific material on it right now. I'm just going to use the default. But what I don't want, you know, the default massing color is sort of a transparent blue. I know I don't want that. So I'm just going to go ahead and apply a gray material to them so I can see it as something solid. Okay, at this point, one of the reasons why I really like these massing tools is at this point I can come in and I can be a little bit more of a sculptor in terms of defining how some things are going to work. For instance, I can just push that edge in. So I'm going to do that with a couple of pieces. Let's push this edge in. And if you notice, it's actually curving this, so that immediately becomes a very difficult and tricky thing to manufacture. I'm not going to worry about that too much right now. I'm more interested in how it works overall. Let's go ahead and see if I can grab this edge and this edge. And I kind of want to pull those in maybe. I might do that later. But hopefully you're kind of getting the idea that with this tool, unlike the generic modeling tools, I have a lot more opportunities. I can even grab a point. Let's say I wanted to actually pull this up and give it a different kind of quality. I could begin doing that as well, and you can see it immediately triangulates that top surface and allows me to do some different kinds of things as well. So I'm actually giving this a little bit of a sense of up and down across the base, which is kind of nice as well. So I've got some low points, I've got some high points, and I'm giving a little bit of inconsistency to the edge, which is all kind of nice stuff to do. So I'm going to go ahead and say finish the mass. And the last thing I kind of want to do, I know there's a display case or two that are going to go along with this. So the next thing I want to do is go ahead and build a second box right here, and I'm going to merge those things together. So with this, I'm going to go back to my top view. Let's just kind of go ahead and start another mass with this. I'm going to go ahead and select it, edit in place. I want to put all of this stuff right together. I'm going to use my box tool this time, and I'm going to use my tab key to select just an edge. And let's make this display about 4 feet by 2'6". Okay, so I'm going to select all of it and create it as a form. And let's make that form about 3 feet tall. So you can see how that's coming together. I'm going to again select all of it and only that object. And let's give it, again, not the default mass material, but let's go ahead and set it to default. So I have that as a solid gray. And now I can select this object and let's move it into place. So I'm going to use my front view, move. Now notice I'm going to my view first and then selecting move. That's sort of an important part of the process. I want to make sure that I'm moving it in the appropriate view. So in this particular case, I have a view that I can begin moving essentially on the X, Z, or Y, Z plane. Let's move this all the way to the ground plane. Or actually, not quite the ground plane. Let's set it just on top of that reveal, just like that. And then with this display case, I'm going to go ahead and push this edge down. And again, just to think about it schematically, I could select this top edge and change its default material perhaps to something, for right now, just a default sort of glazing. So I can see that top edge as being something transparent. Oh, that changed everything to transparent. Let's undo that. Well, you know, if I wanted that to be transparent, apparently I would have to go in and model in a separate edge right here and actually sort of hollow this out as a display case. For right now, I'm just sort of interested in the massing of it. So to get those two masses working together, I'm definitely going to join them. Select this to that. That gets me those edges. I can see a little bit of additional detail on it, how it's going to come together, something that I definitely want to have. And so now I'm going to say finish mass. And the next thing that I need to do, not in that view, but in this view, go ahead and move my Triceratops up so that it's standing on top of all this stuff and not in it. Let's go up just a little bit more. Well, that's actually going over. Let's look at my front view here, or the back view. Up and over. So right now, rather than using the mouse, I'm using my arrow keys so I can just sort of nudge the object around. And I can kind of tip it up and down if I wanted to make sure all the feet were up. But for right now, for all intents and purposes, I'm totally happy with how that's come together. So from right there, I have the basic object coming together. And at this point, I'm ready to go ahead and start looking at how I can make a model of this specific base. So to do that, let's go ahead and do a quick save. And I'm going to select this base object. And I'm going to isolate it. So that's the temporary hide and isolate tools right here. So I'm going to say isolate element. So essentially that's temporarily hid everything on my scene except for that base. And I'm going to come into my add-ins, and I've downloaded the STL exporter for Revit. So to do this, I'm on Revit 2015. If you just do a quick Google search for STL exporter Revit 2015, it's going to take you right to this little add-in. It's about 1 meg, so it only takes a second to install. And with this, I can just run my STL export. And I'm just going to keep the defaults right here, save. base. And I know, let's look at, again, my level 1 plan of this object right here. I know that I want to build probably either a 16th inch or an 1/8 inch model. So I'm going to go ahead and set my scale to an 1/8 inch. And I want to know basically about how big this model should be. So to do that, I'm going to build a brand new sheet. Delete the one I currently have in here. Sheet, new sheet. I'm just going to use the default. And this was an 1/8 inch floor plan right here. And I want to go ahead and bring that plan in. But to do that, let's go ahead and crop this part. It's the only piece that I want to see. So with nothing selected, I know that my properties panel is going to be my view properties. And I'm just going to turn on my croppings right here. I typically just turn on all 3 of them. It's a little easier to manage that way. And I'm going to isolate again just that object. It makes bringing things in on a sheet a little bit easier. So with my sheet selected, I'm just going to drag and drop this guy at an 1/8 inch. And now essentially what I did this for was I know that this is an 1/8 inch of this object. I want to measure sort of what is my longest dimension here. And it is 4 inches. It's way too small of a model to build. Let's go back. Level 1 floor plan. Let's change this guy to a 1/4 inch. And let's measure that one more time in my sheet. And so I'm really just using the sheet layout as a way to check what my dimension should be for my model. 8, and let's call it 8.5. It's perfect. It's a perfect scale to build this model at. So inside of 123D Make, I want to build a laser cut template. So I'm going to go import base. That was the object that I exported directly from Revit. Open. So there's my object inside of Make. I already have my length. That's a pretty happy coincidence there that it's 8 inches, but you know, I'd want to set this, let's say it comes in at 20 inches or something like that. I know that my overall length, my primary length there, needs to be 8 inches. And I'm going to go ahead and set this up probably as a stacking method, because you know I want this to be a fairly solid looking thing. You know, I could use interlocked, but I think stacking is what we'll look at. So I'm going to go to my manufacturer settings. I'm going to build a template for our laser cutter, which is 18 inches by 24 inches. And definitely going to be using cardboard, which that 0.1772 inches is perfect for that. So I'm going to select technique, and let's do a stacking method. And I'm beginning to get something like that. 2 sheets. That doesn't seem quite right on my manufacturer settings. Let's get it again. There we go. 24 inches. Enter. So I'm not too wild about that. Something's not looking quite right in terms of how this is being stacked up. I know this should be way more than 4 sheets thick. So we're going to have to take a quick look at this guy here. 8 inches length, width, height. Let's double check the height of my object in Revit. Let's see here. Revit, there we go. So if my height here, let's look at this object again. I'm going to turn on my cropping. Let's do one more check. Let's bring this in again at a 1/4 inch view. It's always helpful, you know, to rationalize your way through things. 4 layers of cardboard doesn't seem right in Make. I've got something going a little bit wrong. Hopefully this gives me an indicator of what it is that I need to do. And let's check my height here. Height from here to here is about 1 inch. That should be about 10 layers of cardboard thick. So let's check my height in Make. My height is set to 0.870 inches. You know, so this seems about right. So So it's this thickness tool right here that's seeming to do something a little bit wrong for me. 0.2 inches, that should be 4 layers thick. Oh, you know, let's think about how thick a piece of cardboard is then. It's about an 1/8 inch thick. That would be 0.125. Let's see if that doesn't get me a little bit of a different result. Definitely a different result. You know, so that might be exactly what I'm looking for right there as a much, much better system to build this. I get a little bit better of an idea. You know, the other thing that I could do if I wanted more detail, I could drop this down to a piece of chipboard, and chipboard would be 0.031 in its thickness. And you know, I'm liking that just a lot better. It gives me a much better feel for how this should come together. You know, so again, trying a couple of things, a couple of different ways. I have no problem at all gluing 30 pieces. That's really a pretty low effort, high reward kind of thing. I could definitely come back in on something like this, and if I wanted to do something less, I could do this as an interlocking system, you know, with about 10 parts by 10 parts. And you get an idea of how it's going to come together. You know, let's do like a 10 by, let's do here, 10 by 5. But there's something that is much less about describing the mass of this object that I'm not too wild about, that I don't care for as much. And while this is how we're planning on building the system out of plywood eventually, you know, we're going to use those exact same templates and cut it on the CNC router. In terms of making a model for the presentation, this idea of stack slices is a much, much better system in terms of how I can go ahead and print everything out and get this put together in a way that the client can see sort of what we're talking about, where the display cases are going to be, and how all of this is going to come together.